I stared at the birthday cake, 16 candles flickering for a girl who once called me her second mother. No one had saved me a seat. Not at the table, not in their lives. From across the room, Danielle smiled like I was the help, like I hadn't paid the deposit, cooked half the meal, and rocked her daughter through colic. "She doesn't really know you," she whispered, loud enough to stick. My hands were still sticky with frosting, but it wasn't the sugar that stung. It was the erasure. "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The last of the mimosa glasses clinked against the granite counter as Irene dried them with the same blue checked towel she'd had since the late 90s. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes in midair and making the sink shimmer like a stage. Outside, Mark hovered near the grill, half turned toward the patio table, his spatula waving like a flag every time he laughed at something one of Danielle's friends said. Inside, Irene moved slowly, with the soft efficiency that only comes from years of keeping things from breaking. She folded napkins, stacked chipped ceramic plates, and set aside the water pitcher with its wilted lemon slices. The smell of honey ham and cinnamon rolls still clung to the air like perfume. Her back ached, but she didn't mention it. Near the back of the living room, just past the oversized island and the half-drunk pitcher of sangria, Danielle leaned in toward two women. All three wore coordinating linen jumpsuits, part boho, part boardroom, and held wine glasses like accessories. "She's mostly here for the tax breaks, let's be honest," Danielle said in a stage whisper that wasn't meant to carry. "It's like having a dependent without the diaper changes." The women burst out laughing, high and sharp. Irene stopped drying the glass in her hand. Her fingers curled around the stem tighter than she meant to, the towel slipping a little. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just listened as Danielle continued, voice low but casual, like she was reading off a brunch menu. "I mean, she keeps to herself, eats practically nothing. Mark's the one who insisted we let her stay after her fall. I figured if we're going to play nurse, we might as well get some deductions out of it." One of the women raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that kind of illegal?" Danielle giggled. "Only if someone tattles, and she doesn't even know how to log into Facebook." More laughter. Still holding the glass, Irene turned toward the sink, placing it down with care. The laughter behind her rolled on, light and brittle, like ice cracking across a pond. The screen door creaked. Mark poked his head in, cheeks flushed from the grill's heat. "Hey, babe, burgers are ready." Danielle straightened, her smile snapping into place, as if the conversation had never happened. "Perfect. I'll grab the relish." He didn't glance at Irene. Didn't notice the way she stood there, dish towel limp in one hand, her knuckles bone white. Outside, guests moved toward the table with polite clamor, chairs scraping, plates clinking, someone sneezing. Mark returned to his grill station like a good host, blissfully unaware that his wife had just gutted his mother with a single sentence. The door thudded shut behind him. Danielle passed Irene without acknowledgement, humming softly to herself as she opened the fridge and rummaged for condiments. She paused long enough to smear a swipe of hummus off the counter with her palm before disappearing back outside, hips swaying to an invisible beat. Irene stared at the closed door for a full 5 seconds. Then, slowly, she picked up the dish rag again, folded it once, twice, laid it on the edge of the sink like she was done playing house. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, someone laughed too loud. Her phone buzzed in her cardigan pocket. "Paula, you good?" Irene looked at the screen, at the quiet question wrapped in 2 words. She turned toward the kitchen window and watched Mark hand a plate to Danielle, who kissed his cheek and grinned like she hadn't just sold off his mother's dignity for a punchline. The rage didn't come. Not yet. What came first was the cool, precise clarity of a school secretary who's filed away too many reports, answered too many phones, and swallowed too many comments. the kind of woman who could catalog every name, date, and unpaid PTA invoice in alphabetical order without blinking. She typed back, "Not yet, but I will be." Another buzz. "Paula, you want me to start the folder?" A pause. Then, already printing screenshots. Outside, Danielle reached for a wine glass and clinked it against her friend's. Inside, Irene quietly opened the junk drawer and pulled out a blank yellow legal pad. She uncapped a pen. First line. April 9th. "We keep her for the tax breaks." She underlined it twice. Slowly. Her hand didn't shake once. Then the doorbell rang. And Irene knew, without even turning her head, that this wasn't the kind of knock that came from neighbors. It was the kind that started something. By Monday morning, the smell of lemon cleaner and regret clung to the little apartment above the garage. Irene had wiped the counters twice and folded the throw blanket so precisely it could have been used as evidence. But the line she'd written the night before, April 9th, "We keep her for the tax breaks," stared up at her from the yellow pad, ink still dark and decisive. She circled it once, tore off the top sheet and slipped it into her purse next to a manila envelope of bank statements. The morning air was cool, the sky just starting to turn that sharp Kentucky blue that meant spring was serious this time. The bluegrass shuttle hummed her into downtown Lexington, past horse murals and tidy coffee shops. She stepped off near a squat brick building with a faded sign that read, "Andrews CPA Services, since 1984. The lettering had peeled just enough to make the place feel honest. Inside, the office smelled of printer toner and dusted blinds. A tall man in his 60s looked up from behind a monitor. Gray hair, thin spectacles, and the posture of someone who'd spent his life trying to align numbers with truth. "Mrs. Walton," he said, standing to shake her hand. "Clint Andrews. Paula said you might be coming." "I wasn't sure if I'd actually go through with it," Irene admitted, setting her purse neatly on the chair beside her. "Well," he said, settling back down, "people usually come to me when they already know the answer. They just want it confirmed." He typed a few things on his computer, the rhythmic clacking of keys echoing in the small room. "You said your son and daughter-in-law filed jointly?" "Yes. Mark and Danielle Walton." He nodded, eyes narrowing slightly behind the glasses. "Do you mind if I pull their return? I handle their household filings. Mark's payroll goes through the same software." She nodded once. "Please." The silence stretched. Only the faint whir of the printer filled the air as page after page slid out. Clint read through the top sheet, lips tightening. He turned it around and pointed to a line halfway down. "See here? You're listed as a dependent adult relative. That means they're claiming you to reduce their adjusted gross income. Tax credit for caregiving." He paused, studying her face. "Did you give them permission to do that?" Irene blinked once, slowly. "No." "Well." Clint leaned back, removed his glasses, and exhaled. "You have no legal obligation to stay there, Mrs. Walton, and certainly no obligation to let them profit from it." Her fingers folded together in her lap, still and steady. "What happens if I leave?" "You get your autonomy back," he said. "And if you want to dig deeper, I can pull the last 3 years of their returns. See if this has been going on longer than just this filing." For the first time that morning, Irene smiled, small and precise. "You read my mind." Clint gave a faint smile in return. "I usually only say this to accountants, but keep your receipts." 2 hours later, she met Paula at Stella's diner, the kind of place where the waitresses called you honey and meant it. Paula was already in a booth, her choir toad at her feet, stirring a cup of black coffee that smelled burnt and defiant. "Well?" she asked. "They claimed me like I was one of their dependents," Irene said evenly, slipping the printed tax form across the table. Paula adjusted her glasses and let out a low whistle. Bold. Or stupid, Irene said. Paula grinned. Both usually travel together. They ate in near silence, omelets cooling on their plates, the clatter of dishes filling the pauses. A waitress passed with a tray of pies, and for a moment, Irene watched the way the meringue caught the light. Everything about this morning felt too bright, too clean, as if the universe had finally opened a window. Paula leaned forward, lowering her voice. What's our next move? Irene took a slow sip of her coffee, eyes distant but sharp. We'll start where the paper trail starts. Clint's pulling 3 years of returns. If she's been stealing my name, she's left fingerprints. Paula tapped her spoon against the cup, the sound crisp as a bell. You want me to set up a drive folder again? Irene's lips curved just enough to count as a smile. Not yet. Let's give her time to hang herself with a longer rope. Paula nodded, pushing the papers back toward her. Then we wait. Irene folded the form in half, slid it back into her purse and stood. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. I'm done waiting. Outside, a gust of wind sent a swirl of pink petals skittering across the diner's windowpane, and somewhere in that soft blur of spring, Irene's plan began to take shape. Quiet, meticulous, and impossible to undo. Irene laid the folders across her lap like a stack of hymnals, worn at the edges, quietly sacred. She hadn't opened some of them in years. Others she'd kept in their original envelopes, yellowed and brittle, the paper softening like old skin. She worked in silence at the card table in her garage apartment, the overhead light humming faintly. One folder held her Social Security statements, another the thick packet from her pension plan in Bourbon County schools. The third had life insurance documents she hadn't looked at since Mark's father passed. All three had her name, only her name, printed at the top. No Danielle, no Mark, no fine print she didn't recognize. She clipped them shut, placed them in her canvas tote, and zipped it up like a body bag. Clint looked up from his desk as she entered, his expression calm but not casual. He stood before she had to ask. Good timing, he said, pushing aside a small mountain of spreadsheets. I just finished going over last year's return. You're going to want to sit for this. She sat, opened the tote, laid the folders on the desk one by one. I brought what I could find, she said. Clint opened the top folder and scanned quickly, eyes darting across lines with practiced speed. Then he slid a different paper toward her. Danielle and Mark's itemized deductions. See this column here? He said, tapping it with the end of his pen. They reported over $12,000 in shared household expenses, food, utilities, medical supplies, supposedly spent on you. Irene raised one eyebrow. She has me down for $300 a month in over-the-counter medications. I haven't taken anything stronger than Tylenol since 2015. And even then, Clint added, you bought it yourself, using your own account. He flipped the page. It gets better. Mark filed as head of household last year. That's not legal if you're married and both spouses live together. Irene's jaw stayed still, but her pen clicked open in her hand. She pulled her yellow legal pad from her purse and began writing. Date, figures, lies cataloged like entries in a ledger. She's not sloppy, Irene murmured. She's confident. That's worse. Clint nodded. It's what most people miss. They look for error when they should be looking for arrogance. From the corner of the room came the quiet shuffle of fabric. Didn't think I'd miss this part, Paula said, sliding into the chair by the copier, her coat still speckled with rain. She held her phone up like a camera crew. You mind? Clint glanced at Irene, who simply nodded. Snap away, she said. Just don't get my bad side. Paula smiled, her phone already clicking through each page. Clint continued, flipping back to a second return. Same story going back 2 years. Same fabricated expenses. Same false head of household status. And all of it wrapped around your name like a bow. He leaned back, folding his hands. IRS might call it misrepresentation, but paired with what you've told me, it starts looking like fraud. And if you can prove malicious intent, well, that's when it stops being a family issue. Irene wrote it all down without pausing. Paula glanced up from her phone. You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking Danielle doesn't just need a slap on the wrist, Irene said, eyes still on the paper. She needs a paper trail around her ankles. A long silence filled the room. Then Clint said, How far back are you willing to go? Irene met his eyes without hesitation. All the way. Clint slid a fresh folder toward her. Then we'll need full signatures, bank records, utility bills, anything with her handwriting or login trail. You willing to dig through it? Irene gave a thin, hard smile. Clint, I was a secretary for 32 years. I know how to find what someone thought they deleted. Paula's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, brow lifting. I just got a ping. Danielle's posted a photo. Caption says, Spring cleaning with my favorite tax deduction. Clint muttered, Jesus. Irene took the last sip of her coffee, then stood and gathered her papers like blueprints for a war. Then let's clean house. And as she stepped outside into the soft mist of a Lexington afternoon, a thought threaded through her mind, sharp, cold, and steady. She thinks I won't make this public. She's wrong. The Bluegrass Credit Union branch smelled faintly of coffee and new laminate. A bronze plaque near the door announced community awards from years ago. Someone had stapled a flyer about a quilting circle to the community board, and it sagged like a small, hopeful flag. Irene moved through the bank with the deliberate calm of someone who'd never been in a hurry to begin with. At the teller window, she recognized the woman, Lori, who'd cashed her pension checks for the last 5 years. Lori's smile was a practiced shape, warm but reserved. Mrs. Walton, good to see you. What can we do for you today? Irene set her canvas tote on the counter and placed the yellow pad beside it like a passport. I need to change a few things on my accounts, she said. Remove authorized users, open a new savings, new checks, and I want my mail rerouted. Lori's fingers moved through the forms with a small choreography learned from regional branches and retired callers. Do you have ID? Of course. Irene handed over her driver's license and a small stack of documents. The latest pension stub, a utility bill with her name, and a photocopy of the Social Security letter. Lori scanned them, eyes catching the neat handwriting on the legal pad. She made a show of tapping keys, then frowned. Mrs. Walton, there's an online authorization showing Danielle Walton as an authorized signer on your account. And there's a note in the file, POA, on record. Do you know anything about that? The pen in Irene's hand paused. No, she said, low. I don't. Lori pulled up a faded, scanned document and rotated the screen toward Irene. The signature was a looping script. She'd seen signatures like it on PTA letters and condolence cards. But something about the curl of the J and the decisive slash of the T set her teeth on edge. We can remove them with a signature from you, Lori said. But if there's a power of attorney on file, we'll need to see the original or a certified copy to process the removal. Irene's pulse nudged at the base of her throat, but she kept her voice even. Then let's start by removing access. I want them off this account today. Lori made calls and printed forms. The waiting area hummed with the soft monotone of bank machines. Irene signed, initialed, and stamped where instructed, her handwriting small and tidy. She opened a new personal savings account, only her name on the line, moved a portion of the funds, and set up online-only alerts to her phone and Paula's email. She ordered a fresh box of checks with her name centered, the bank logo and her address crisp beneath it. Halfway through the transfer, Clint Andrews walked in like he belonged to the walls of the building, a small figure with a manila folder tucked under his arm and the look of an ally. He'd driven her over. He'd promised he wouldn't let her face whatever came next alone. He set his folder on the counter and tapped the top. "You'll need this," he said to Irene, sliding a single-sheet affidavit across to her. "I drew up a clear financial affidavit. It states what you've authorized, what you haven't, and it's sworn under penalty of perjury. Keep a signed copy, give one to Paula, and I'll attach a sworn statement to the tax records if it comes to that." Read it quickly. Crisp legal language, the kind of clean architecture a lifetime of record-keeping appreciates. She signed where Clint indicated. The ink dried as stubborn and black as a verdict. Paula arrived breathless from the street, cheeks flushed from the cold. She slipped into the chair across from Irene and, without a word, pressed a bright yellow sticky note into her hand. The words were written in Paula's looped script. Rosa. Legal aid. Trustworthy. "Rosa?" Irene asked, the syllable new in her mouth. "Rosa Kim," Paula said. "She runs the senior legal clinic at the library. No nonsense. Cuts through paperwork like a butter knife. If anyone's going to unspool whatever Danielle's wrapped herself in, it's Rosa." Irene folded the note into her palm, feeling the soft ridges of the paper. Clint collected the signed affidavit and tucked a copy into his folder. Lori handed Irene a receipt for the transfers and a printout showing the authorized users removed. Except the line entered under Notes made Irene's stomach drop. It read in small type, "POA on file, original on hold at branch." "On hold?" Irene asked, her voice steady but considerably smaller. "Why would you have an original? I never filed a power of attorney." Lori looked uncomfortable. "Sometimes people bring things in and we scan them for records. It's bank policy to flag originals and hold them temporarily until all parties are verified." Clint's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, noting the way Irene's fingers curled around the receipt. "Can we see the original?" he asked. Lori hesitated, hands hovering over the keyboard. "I'll have to put in a request. It could take a day." A day felt like a thin, long razor. Paula slid the sticky note back across the counter, her grin vanishing for a moment. "Rosa will know how to get things moving faster than a bank's red tape." Irene tucked the note into her wallet beside the yellow pad. She had new checks to reorder, a fresh account to guard, an affidavit signed and notarized, and the sudden, unwelcome knowledge that someone with access to her personal paperwork, had left a paper footprint the bank was now protecting. She stood, the new purse heavier at her arm, and stepped toward the door. The spring light outside was pale and patient. Clint's voice stopped her halfway across the threshold. "If that POA is real," he said, "we need to see it before dark." Her pen clicked in the pocket of her cardigan like a small, deadly metronome. And then her phone buzzed with a single text from Paula. "Rosa can help. Meeting Tuesday. Bring everything." Irene slowed, looked at the bank door, then down at the folded legal pad peeking out of her purse. She felt, suddenly and with unusual clarity, the shape of the fight ahead. Paper and signatures and other people's lies, arranged like obstacles on a path she'd chosen to walk. Behind the teller counter, a copier whirred. On the bank's wall, a clock ticked toward noon. The bank vault door hummed quietly, implacable as any judge. The Lexington Public Library's basement level didn't smell like books. It smelled like linoleum, recirculated air, and weak coffee brewed in an old stainless carafe that hadn't been properly scrubbed since Reagan. The senior legal aid clinic was tucked behind the genealogy archive. 3 folding tables, mismatched chairs, and one whiteboard announcing Rosa Kim, Scanner. Free legal consults, ages 60 plus, walk-ins, welcome. Irene arrived early, not because she was nervous, but because the truly dangerous women always arrive early. Rosa Kim was already setting up, snapping latex gloves over long fingers as she sorted manila folders into labeled bins. She wore jeans and a navy blue cardigan over a chambray shirt, her black hair pulled into a low bun, peppered just enough to prove she'd earned her no-bullshit tone. "You, Irene?" Rosa asked, not looking up. "Yes. You brought everything?" "I did." "Then sit." Irene sat. Rosa motioned for the tote, and Irene passed it across the table. One by one, Rosa laid out the evidence like cards in a hand. Clint's affidavit, bank records, tax copies, the yellow pad with the first line written in sharp black pen, April 9th. "We keep her for the tax breaks." Rosa didn't speak for a long while. Her brow furrowed, eyes flicking from line to line like she was reading a criminal confession, not a tax return. Then, softly but clearly, she said, "This is financial elder abuse." Irene looked at her with tired clarity. "She thinks she owns me." Rosa set the page down, her expression sharpening. "She doesn't even own her own words anymore. You've got documentation, a witness, a clear financial paper trail, and evidence of forgery. That's not just unethical, it's actionable." Irene tilted her head. "You saw the forgery?" Rosa tapped the bank printout. "That POA scan? I've seen real ones. That's a copy of a fake. The notary stamp is pixelated. Signatures all wrong, but even worse?" She pulled out a final sheet from the folder, one Irene hadn't seen before. It was a cohabitation agreement, stamped and dated, allegedly from 2 years ago. Irene's name sat neatly under Danielle's in a font that tried too hard to mimic a signature. "What is this?" Irene asked, her voice low. "Your daughter-in-law submitted this to your credit union last spring," Rosa said. "Filed it alongside the POA. Claimed it proved mutual agreement for shared living costs. You see this form a lot in tenancy disputes. But look here." She circled a detail in red ink. The date at the bottom read, May 4th, 2023. Rosa looked Irene square in the eye. "Where were you that day?" Irene didn't hesitate. "Recovering from knee surgery. At Mercy Regional. I was on morphine and barely conscious." "Bingo!" Rosa slid a legal form across the table. "We'll start by filing a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services, financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior. It kicks off a formal investigation. No more playing nice. Once this is filed, they'll have to account for everything they touched in your name." Irene signed without hesitation. Rosa continued. "Next step. Clerk of court. We're going to void that POA and every document they used it to open. We'll need a sworn statement from your physician confirming you weren't of sound mind the day they claim you signed this." "I can get that," Irene said. "I still have the discharge papers." "Good. Bring them tomorrow. And tell Clint to prep a document pack for the IRS. They'll want this trail airtight." Irene nodded slowly, each instruction absorbed like a prescription she intended to follow to the letter. Rosa leaned back, folding her arms. "She really thought she could paper over you with fake forms and fuzzy logic. What she doesn't realize is—" "She left her fingerprints," Irene finished. "Exactly." Rosa smiled for the first time. It was not a kind smile. "We're going to file those fingerprints where they belong." As Irene gathered her papers back into the tote, the lights above flickered once, humming against the weight of the afternoon. Rosa checked her watch. "You free next Wednesday?" "I am now." "Then let's ruin someone's week." Just as Irene zipped up her tote, Rosa paused, rummaged through her own bag, and pulled out a small recorder. "I'll need you to tell me everything. Start from the moment you heard her say it. Word for word." Irene pressed the edge of her yellow pad flat on the table. "I remember exactly how she said it." Rosa clicked record, and Irene began. But just as her voice started to spill into the room, a voice echoed from the hallway, a young intern calling, Ms. Kim, someone's here asking about that POA, claims to be a family representative. Won't give a name. Rosa's eyes met Irene's. Looks like they're already scared. The floorboards in Irene's apartment creaked louder than usual that night, like they knew. She sat at the edge of her bed, the folder from Rosa now stacked beside her nightstand, like a final exam waiting to be passed. Outside, spring rain painted streaks down the garage window, leaving trails that looked suspiciously like tally marks. By morning, Irene had made her decision. She caught the county clerk just as the office opened. Still sleepy, still cordial. The woman behind the counter wore a scarf with cartoon cats and greeted her with a smile that vanished the moment Irene said, "Zoning records." "Address?" the woman asked. 412 Haverly Drive, the detached unit behind the main house. The clerk frowned and typed. "Is it listed as an accessory dwelling unit or a mother-in-law suite?" Irene folded her hands. "It's a converted garage, with plumbing added. Sometime in 2007, I think." The woman's fingers paused. "We have no record of an approved conversion." "Meaning?" "It's not zoned for residential occupancy. Not legally." Irene gave the smallest, most knowing nod. "Could I get that in writing?" Later that afternoon, back at Clint's office, Irene dropped the zoning document onto his desk. Clint didn't say anything for a long moment. He just let out a low whistle and turned it toward the light. No occupancy permit, no secondary residence registration. He looked up. And yet, they filed taxes claiming household expenses for supporting a dependent who lives in the residence. "And they took rent," Irene added, her voice steady. "She's called it that. I have texts." Clint raised both brows. "They reported income from that?" "No, but they listed it under deductions, utilities, shared housing costs, square footage maintenance." He turned to his filing cabinet, pulled out the return again, and laid it side by side with the zoning violation. "So they listed your unit as part of the primary residence, deducted your expenses, and failed to report any rental income. That's layered fraud." From the chair in the corner, Paula crossed her legs and lifted her phone. "Got pictures too," she said. "Want to see the bathroom ceiling where the pipe leaks every time it rains?" She scrolled. "Here's the bucket she has to use under the sink. Here's the makeshift railing on the stairs. I helped install it after her knee surgery because Mark said he was too busy." She turned the screen toward Clint. "Want copies?" "Please." Paula started forwarding the photos with swift taps of her thumb. Her mouth was tight, but her eyes were alight. "My favorite is the space heater on top of a stack of Reader's Digests. Fire marshal would have a stroke." Clint leaned forward, pointing to one of the tax entries. "This figure here, shared household maintenance, is over $2,000. That number only makes sense if they were charging you rent to live in that space." "They never said the word lease," Irene said. "But Danielle used to leave envelopes on the kitchen counter, labeled contribution, with exact numbers." Clint slid the zoning document next to the envelope photo Paula had just sent. "Then as far as the city's concerned, they're landlords." Irene smoothed the hem of her blouse. "Then let's treat them like it." Clint grinned. "That means housing code violations, IRS misrepresentation, and, if Rosa agrees, possibly civil penalties for unlawful tenancy." "And the envelope texts?" Irene asked. "Gold," Clint said. "It proves intent. They took money in exchange for illegal occupancy and still claim deductions for providing care. That's double dipping, and it's reckless." "I think they thought I'd be too embarrassed to ever talk," Irene said. Her voice was calm, but her spine was straight as rebar. "Well," Paula said, slipping her phone into her bag, "they should have known better than to try hiding their crime inside a garage with mildew and a broken smoke detector." Clint flipped open his notepad. "I'll draft a letter to the city inspector, attach the zoning violation, and recommend a formal inspection. If they're not licensed landlords, they're in violation. If they are, they've failed to report income. Either way, they're boxed in. Irene stood and picked up her tote. This was never a home, she said. It was a loophole with a twin bed. She turned toward the door, pausing just as Clint's printer came to life. Where are you headed? Paula asked, following her. To print out every message she's ever left me with a $sign in it. The machine whirred, stacking documents with a rhythmic hiss, and Clint muttered as the first sheet rolled out. Let's see how Danielle explains this to a housing inspector with a camera. The notice arrived on a Thursday, a laminated sheet stapled to a neon orange placard, nailed square to the doorframe of Irene's garage apartment, unfit for habitation, City of Lexington Division of Code Enforcement. It flapped in the breeze like a warning flag. Irene stood at her kitchen window, sipping tea, as Danielle stormed across the lawn in pink running shoes and a North Face jacket that hadn't seen a trail in its life. She didn't knock. She barged, one arm flung open for drama, the other clutching her phone like a weapon. What the hell did you do? Danielle shrieked. Irene didn't flinch. She placed her teacup on its saucer with the same precision she used filing school attendance sheets for 30 years. I think you'll find the city did it. You're being selfish, Danielle spat. You live here rent-free, you eat our food. And now, what? You call the city on your own family? Irene turned. Calm. Slow. I paid for every bag of groceries with my own card. You just never noticed because I didn't announce it with a receipt parade. Danielle's mouth opened, but no sound came. You lied to the IRS. You lied to the bank. You forged documents while I was on painkillers, Irene continued. The fact that I didn't already have this entire place condemned was grace, not oversight. Danielle blinked, visibly recalculating. Before she could respond, the front door creaked again. Mark. Wrinkled polo, thinning hair sticking up in the back. Guilt radiated off him like heat from asphalt. Irene, can we just talk? He asked, voice brittle. All of this, it's gone too far. We should have communicated better. Maybe we can fix this quietly? Irene looked at him like he was offering her half of a broken plate. You had that chance, she said. You let her speak for you. So this is me, speaking for myself. Danielle scoffed and turned to Mark, whispering something too quiet to catch. Mark didn't answer. He just ran a hand through his hair and looked down, as if the cracks in the driveway could swallow him whole. Irene walked past them both, out the door, down the loose wooden stairs the inspector had photographed the day before. At the mailbox, she found the manila envelope she'd been waiting for. Back inside, she opened it carefully. Clint's amended filings, her revised tax return, full audit documentation, notes confirming the elder care deduction had been improperly claimed without consent. The letter included the refund estimate, $2,038.77, pending final processing. She folded the letter and slid it into her desk drawer beside the yellow pad. That Sunday, Paula's house smelled like rosemary chicken and something sweet cooling on the stove. A gospel record played faintly in the background, soft scratches included. Irene sat at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea, watching the sunlight dance across Paula's blue and white china. Heard they called the inspector a glorified clipboard jockey, Paula said, slicing cornbread with surgical precision. That'll go over real nice in the report. Irene smiled faintly. Danielle left a voicemail yesterday. Said I ambushed them. You did, Paula said. It just wasn't with what she expected. She thought you'd snap back with feelings. You snapped back with documentation. They ate quietly for a while. Two women who'd seen enough lies to know truth when they tasted it. After dessert, Paula handed her a sealed envelope. What's this? Copy of the photos I printed, for your file, labeled and time-stamped. Clint asked for backups. Irene tucked the envelope into her purse without a word. As she stood to leave, Paula touched her arm. You okay? I will be, Irene said. Every step I take out of that garage is a step toward being whole again. She turned toward the door, purse slung over her shoulder like armor. Paula called after her. You need me to ride shotgun tomorrow? No, Irene said. This one I do alone. Outside, the sky was turning the soft color of Kentucky dusk, honeyed light with bruises on the edges. Irene walked toward her car. When she opened the door, her phone buzzed. A new message. From a number she didn't recognize. We need to talk. Before this gets worse. No name. Just those 7 words. Irene stared at the screen, her fingers hovering, unreadable. Then she saved the message. And didn't reply. The paperwork was thicker than Irene expected. 37 pages long, with attachments, exhibits, and an affidavit bearing her trembling but unmistakable signature. She didn't rush the pen. Every curl of ink was deliberate, a slow carving of truth into bureaucracy. The Adult Protective Services office sat on the second floor of an unassuming beige building wedged between a dentist's office and a vape shop. Irene climbed the stairs alone. She didn't need backup for this part. Rosa met her at the door, already in motion, already annoyed. They rescheduled us from room B to D. No reason, just incompetence. Maybe the room's afraid of what we're about to bring into it, Irene said softly. Rosa smirked. Let's make it earn its fear. Inside, a caseworker with gray roots and a nervous smile sat behind a metal desk, fingers tented over a stack of intake forms. Rosa did most of the talking, concise, clipped, deadly. She handed over the binder she'd prepared. Forged POA, cohabitation agreement, tax filings, photos, zoning violations, texts, envelopes, bank flags, Exhibit A through H, color-coded and tabbed. Financial elder abuse, ongoing, Rosa said. Falsified legal authority, unlicensed tenancy, misuse of federal caregiving deductions, forgery while the victim was under post-op sedation. The caseworker blinked. You're not her attorney? No, I'm her weapon. Irene didn't smile. She didn't need to. The caseworker turned to her gently. Mrs. Walton, is there any part of this you'd like to add, in your own words? Irene reached for her yellow legal pad and turned to a page already prepared. Her handwriting was neat, underscored in red. I was made to feel like a guest in my own life, she said. But I've come to understand I was actually a product. They listed me as a dependent when I was fully independent. They called me family while filing me as currency. I am no longer interested in their apology. I am interested in accountability. The caseworker nodded once, then twice more, slower. We'll begin our investigation immediately. You'll be assigned a case ID today. By Friday morning, Irene had filed her official change of address form with the post office. Mail would now be rerouted to Paula's front porch. A clean blue mailbox with her name on a brass plate and the kind of welcome mat that made you believe in pie. She moved quietly, discreetly. A few clothes, her tax documents, 1 casserole dish. No goodbyes. She didn't tell Mark. She didn't need to. That afternoon, Clint arrived at Paula's house in his rumbling Buick, a slim folder in hand. Sworn CPA statement, he said, stamped, notarized, and submitted. It outlines the financial history and clarifies every lie they told with my name on it. Irene opened the folder and ran her fingers along the embossed notary seal like it was a medal. You think it'll be enough? Paula asked, standing in the doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder. It's not about enough, Clint said. It's about momentum. You've got the ball. Keep it rolling. He turned to Irene. You've done everything right so far. You're not just playing defense anymore. This is offense. Irene nodded once. Good. I'm tired of apologizing for breathing. They had just finished tea when the shouting started. Danielle's voice sliced through the Sunday quiet like a hornet through cotton. I know she's in there. You don't get to hide her. This is my family. Paula moved calmly to the screen door, unlatched it, stepped onto the porch, and closed it behind her. Danielle was in the yard, hair wild, eyeliner smudged, phone clenched in her hand like it had a trigger. You're interfering, Danielle hissed. I have rights, legal ones. You're harboring her like she's a fugitive. She's not hiding, Paula said, voice cool. She's recovering. I want to talk to her. Paula tilted her head. And I want better neighbors. But here we are? Danielle took a step forward. You can't keep me from her. Yes, I can, Paula said. And I'm going to keep doing it until the ink on that APS report is dry. Maybe longer, depending on my mood. Danielle's face contorted. She's tearing this family apart. No, Paula replied, reaching for the screen door latch. She's just finally stopped letting you do it. She locked the screen with a sharp click, turned on her heel, and disappeared back inside. Irene stood in the hallway, silent, unseen. From the porch, Danielle screamed, You think this is over? You have no idea what I can do. Irene didn't flinch. She walked to the dining table, picked up Rosa's latest note, a list of follow-ups, deadlines, instructions, and flipped it over. Then she wrote a new line across the back. Let her try. The official city inspection report arrived in a blue envelope with a seal Irene had never seen before. Silver, embossed, and unforgiving. Inside, the letter was brief and lethal. Structure declared unfit for human habitation. All tenants to vacate within 10 business days. Violations attached. She laid it on the dining table at Paula's, beside the fresh vase of tulips and a slice of chess pie. Then she read the violations aloud, one by one, like scripture. Mold, electrical hazards, unsafe stairs, improper insulation, no secondary egress. Feels like an obituary, Paula said, peering over her reading glasses. For their integrity. On Wednesday, Rosa called with her voice low and measured. You should sit. I'm standing, Irene replied. Then brace yourself. The IRS just flagged Danielle and Mark's return for audit. Not a routine one. An investigative review. It's been assigned to the fraud division. There was a pause. Irene's breath caught, not in fear, but in a kind of solemn awe. Clint's affidavit? She asked. Front and center, Rosa said. Plus the forged cohabitation agreement, the claim deductions, the lack of rental income. It's all hitting at once. If I had to guess, they'll start with her. At 9:14 the next morning, Clint walked through Paula's front door with a cashier's check in his hand and satisfaction in his step. Reimbursement arrived, he said, placing the envelope gently in front of Irene. IRS processed the amended return. They agreed with everything we submitted. You've got $2,038.77 headed straight to your account. Irene opened the envelope and ran a finger over the printed numbers. I've never cared so much about decimals. You earned every cent, Clint said, and she's going to pay for every lie that tried to steal it from you. By Friday afternoon, things began to crumble in public. First, Danielle's Facebook profile vanished. One day, it was endless photos of brunches, home spa kits, and inspirational quotes. And the next, it simply returned a page that read, User not found. She's hiding the version of herself that looked polished, Paula said, reading from her iPad. Only cowards delete their archives. She's running out of control, Irene replied. She used to be strategic. Now she's just deleting the breadcrumbs. Then came the email. Not to Irene, not to Rosa, but to Clint, who opened it on his office desktop with a grim sigh. He called Irene immediately. It's from Mark's HR department, he said. They were contacted by federal investigators. His company's legal division is now aware he submitted false tax information and may have participated in document fraud. Irene sat very still. I'm sorry, Clint added. I know he's still your son. I don't know what he is anymore, Irene said, her voice thin and deliberate. But I do know what he's not. He's not a victim. He watched her do this. He let it happen. Clint hesitated. There's one more thing. Rosa asked me to tell you in person, but I'd rather you hear it now. A beat passed. She was formally charged this morning, Irene. Forgery in the 2nd degree. Irene didn't speak at first. Then, you're sure? There's a case number. It's real. She closed her eyes and imagined Danielle, nails chipped, phone gripped like a lifeline, lips pressed into a sour line as the reality of charges unfolded before her. She imagined the look Mark would give. Confused, wounded, maybe even relieved, like a man watching his own house catch fire from the front lawn. You okay? Clint asked. Irene opened her eyes again. I'm not sure okay fits, but I'm ready. That night, Rosa came over with a fresh bottle of bourbon and a warning in her eyes. This next part's going to be loud, she said, pouring 2 fingers neat into crystal glasses. She might settle. She might double down. But either way, it's about to go public. Irene took a sip and leaned back in Paula's armchair, the floral one with the deep seat and creaky frame. Let her shout, she said. Truth echoes louder. But even as she spoke the words, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Unknown number. You think you've won? You're not done with us. Paula reached over and grabbed the phone, read it once, then set it down on the table like it was something that needed cooling off. Rosa sipped her drink. No, she's not done. But the law just started. Irene folded her arms. And in that moment, it wasn't Danielle's voice that haunted the room. It was the sound of consequences getting organized. The woman at Bluegrass Mutual didn't ask many questions. Her name was Patrice, and she wore her glasses on a jeweled chain that swung softly each time she leaned forward to click something. Irene sat across from her in a chair that squeaked when she crossed her ankles. This won't take long, Patrice said kindly, scrolling through the screen. You just need to verify who you'd like to remove as policy beneficiaries. Irene didn't flinch. Danielle Walton. Revoke full access, and remove Mark Walton as my emergency contact. Patrice paused, her eyes flicking to the side. Both? Yes, both. Her voice was calm, more like accounting than grief. The cursor blinked. A line was struck through. And just like that, decades of assumption vanished from her legal future. That afternoon, Irene met Rosa in the community center conference room, where a stack of yellow envelopes sat like a jury. Each one was sealed, labeled, and ready for dispatch. Rosa slid one across the table. Cease and desist. We're sending Danielle copies by mail and email. One for her lawyer, too. She finally hired one. Real estate guy. Should be fun watching him try to navigate elder law. And Mark? Irene asked. Rosa handed her a second envelope. Same. We list every specific communication they're barred from making. Text, phone, social media, third-party contact. If they try anything again, it escalates to a restraining order. Irene took the envelope with both hands, steady. And we are this close, Rosa added, pressing thumb and forefinger together, to filing a formal motion for punitive damages. Not just recovery, retribution. Irene smiled faintly. You really don't like bullies, do you? Not ones who commit fraud in yoga pants, Rosa said. Clint arrived at Paula's an hour later with a red binder in hand and a gleam in his eye. Irene Walton, meet your new best friend, a protective living trust. He set the binder down gently like it contained something sacred. Your assets, savings, pension, insurance, are now out of reach. No one can access them without trustee authority, which is you. He flipped to the tabbed page and pointed. We've also included a successor trustee clause, just in case. Paula's name's on it, if you approve. I do, Irene said, without hesitation. Paula looked over at her with something close to pride, or maybe love. Well, shoot. Guess I better start keeping a nicer pen on me. Clint stood, brushing off his pants. You're locked up tighter than Fort Knox, Irene. They can scream all they want. The money's untouchable. She exhaled. Long, slow, quiet. Like she'd been holding her breath for months. That evening, Paula baked chocolate chess pie from scratch, the kind with the buttery crust and gooey middle that didn't need an occasion, but this time had one anyway. The kitchen filled with the smell of brown sugar and something older. Belonging. You? No, Paula said as she set the pie on the table. I've watched women your age go under quieter than this. Let themselves be erased. I'm proud of you for stepping out of the fire instead of laying down in it. Irene sliced 2 pieces. I didn't step out. I walked straight through. They ate in silence, watching the pie disappear like bitterness never stood a chance. At her new apartment, modest, sunlit, and mercifully hers, Irene unpacked her last box. A bookshelf sat by the window. 2 teacups on the counter. The legal pad, yellowed and creased, now pinned to a corkboard above her desk. The first line still legible. April 9th. We keep her for the tax breaks. She sat in the armchair near the window and opened a worn paperback. To the Lighthouse, one she'd never gotten around to finishing. Outside, Lexington breathed in spring. The street below was quiet except for a wind chime tapping from a neighbor's porch. Irene read slowly. No rush. No interruptions. Her phone was on silent. Her bank account was hers again. Her voice, too. But just as she turned the page, a shadow passed her window. A figure. Brief. Familiar. Hair pulled up. Coat too nice for this side of town. Danielle. She didn't knock. She didn't even linger. She simply walked past the building, turned at the corner, and disappeared into the distance like a bad decision that hadn't quite accepted its consequences yet. Irene didn't get up, didn't look out. Instead, she turned another page and kept reading. The letter arrived in Rosa's inbox just after 8 a.m. Subject line: Cease and desist. Client representation. Danielle Walton. It was 3 pages of bluster wrapped in legalese. A real estate attorney out of Danville, writing on borrowed authority and low hourly rates, demanding Irene immediately suspend all defamatory action and hostile legal filings against Ms. Walton to avoid further litigation. Rosa didn't even blink. She printed it on the slow office printer at the library, watching it spit the pages out like the machine itself was tired of reading this nonsense. She stapled it once, clean and tight, then clipped it to the top of a fresh folder. 10 minutes later, she emailed her response. Subject: Cease and desist attachment. Request for IRS audit review. Subject: Danielle Walton. Year 2022-2023. In the body, she wrote just 2 lines. Received your letter. Please see attached counter. That afternoon, Irene sat on Paula's porch, the same spot where the honeysuckle now curled along the railing like it knew something sweet was finally growing again. Paula rocked slowly on the porch swing, shelling pecans into a bowl on her lap. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't have to. Then, from the street, came a sound Irene hadn't heard in weeks: her son's car. The old silver Camry with the crack in the taillight. It rolled up slowly, like it didn't want to admit where it was going. Mark stepped out, dressed in khakis that hadn't been ironed and a button-down that looked like it had tried to pass for clean. No Danielle in sight. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the house, stopping near the porch steps like he was afraid of trespassing. Irene? He asked. Paula didn't move. She just shifted slightly, letting her bare foot keep the swing's momentum going. Irene? Mark said again, softer. Can we talk? She stood slowly and came to the top of the steps. No dramatics. No lecture forming on her tongue. He looked older than he had last time. Not tired, just hollowed out. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "Danielle. She gets caught up in things. She thought we were just being smart. Just taking advantage of the system like everyone else does." Irene's hand stayed folded in front of her. "You called it smart. The city called it unfit for habitation." His shoulders sagged. "Mom, this isn't what we meant. You have to believe that." She looked at him then, for the first time in what felt like years. Not like a mother. Like a woman who had finally stopped editing herself. "That's the problem," she said, her voice barely louder than the creak of the porch swing. "You did mean it. You meant every deduction, every envelope, every time you didn't stop her." Mark blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. For a moment he looked like he might cry. Instead, he turned away, walked back toward the car like a man being released from a prison he hadn't realized he'd built. He didn't look back. When the Camry disappeared down the street, Paula reached over and set the pecan bowl aside. "You okay?" "No," Irene said, "but I will be. Eventually." She sat back down beside Paula, who offered no advice, just handed her a pecan. They shelled in silence, letting the soft evening fall around them like a blanket. At midnight, Irene couldn't sleep. She walked into her small kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window overlooking the quiet street. The porch light below still glowed. Paula had left it on for her, just in case she needed to see something clearly. Her phone buzzed on the counter. One new message. From an unknown number. This time, it was a voice memo. She pressed play. Danielle's voice. Tired, sharp, trembling beneath the surface. "You think this makes you strong? You're alone. You think you've won because you cut us off? But we made you relevant. Without us, you're just no one." Irene didn't reply. She simply forwarded the message to Rosa, then she deleted it. And finally, after weeks of sound and fury and slow, righteous war, she stepped into the bedroom, pulled the quilt over her shoulders, and let the silence hold her. Because for the first time in a long time, it wasn't something she owed. It was something she'd earned. Rosa's office smelled like lemon cleaner and stress. Legal pads stacked like city. Blocks covered every inch of the folding table she called a desk, and Irene sat at its edge, flipping through one labeled Exhibit C. "You'll be fine," Rosa said, tapping a red pen against her coffee mug. "Just tell the truth. Don't editorialize, and don't try to be polite." "I stopped trying to be polite 3 months ago," Irene said, glancing at her notes. "Good," Rosa said. "This isn't church. This is war in nice shoes." Clint had already been by earlier that morning. He'd arrived carrying a rigid black portfolio and a printer-fresh index sheet labeled Exhibits AF. In typical Clint fashion, everything was in 3-ring binders, color-coded and cross-referenced with page numbers, tabs, and supplemental exhibits. "Let the record show," he said dryly as he handed the stack to Rosa. "This mess started with a brunch." Rosa chuckled. "And it's ending with a binder." They spent the next hour reviewing the order of presentation. Exhibit A, forged cohabitation agreement. B, power of attorney with mismatched dates. C, photos of unsafe living conditions. D, screenshots of text messages and labeled envelopes. E, Clint's signed CPA affidavit. F, Irene's statement, notarized and complete. "I don't want them to have anywhere to hide," Rosa said. "They won't," Irene replied, voice calm. "Not anymore." The continuance motion hit Rosa's email at 4:41 p.m. the day before the hearing. Filed by Danielle's attorney. A single paragraph citing recent emotional distress and scheduling conflicts. Rosa forwarded it to Irene with the subject line, "Please," then called the court clerk. The judge denied it in less than an hour. The morning of the hearing, Paula arrived at Irene's door carrying a garment bag. I bought it before I knew what size you'd be post-war, she said, holding it up like an offering. You deserve something that isn't attached to trauma. Irene unzipped the bag and smiled. Inside was a soft navy blue church dress with a fitted waist, lace at the collar, and sleeves that skimmed the elbow like they had somewhere to be. You didn't have to, Irene said. I did, Paula replied. Because she'll show up looking like money, but you'll show up looking like truth. The Fayette County Courthouse was too clean, too tall, and too cold. Marble stairs, metal detectors, the echo of heels against tile like a metronome for the anxious. Rosa met Irene just outside the main doors, file folder in hand and blazer sharp enough to cut through red tape. You ready? She asked. I'm not here to be ready, Irene said. I'm here to be right. They walked in together. Rosa a step behind, like a bodyguard, like a shadow that bit back. Inside, Danielle stood near her lawyer in a beige pantsuit that looked expensive and miserable. Her hair was pulled too tight, her expression somewhere between fury and forced indifference. She didn't make eye contact. Neither did Mark, who sat 2 rows back, blinking too often and folding a tissue into smaller and smaller squares. The bailiff called the case. Everyone stood. And Irene, wearing the dress Paula picked, the shoes Rosa recommended, and the spine she had spent a lifetime building, walked to the front of the room like she had nothing to hide and no one left to protect. She didn't look at Danielle. She didn't need to. The judge glanced through the file Rosa had submitted. His eyebrows lifted at least twice. Let's begin, he said. Rosa stood with calm precision. Your Honor, we're prepared to present sworn testimony, notarized statements, and 6 exhibits showing a sustained pattern of financial manipulation, identity fraud, and unlawful tenancy filed in the name of my client, Irene Walton. Danielle's lawyer cleared his throat, already flustered. We object to the presentation of new materials. They're not new, Rosa said smoothly. You just didn't read them. The judge glanced at the clock. We'll hear the first witness. Irene stepped forward, calm, dignified, unshakable. And just as she raised her right hand to be sworn in, her phone buzzed quietly in her purse. Later, she'd see the message Rosa had forwarded from the court clerk. Danielle Walton, subject to pending felony review. Indictment expected within 48 hours. The courtroom was cold enough to make the microphone hum. Irene sat at the witness table, one palm resting lightly on Exhibit F, the affidavit she'd signed weeks ago, the one that turned her story into evidence. The clerk swore her in, and for a moment, the air stilled. State your name for the record, the judge said. Irene Walton. Her voice was clear, quiet but not fragile. The kind of voice that made people lean in. Rosa gave her a small nod from the counsel table. Then she began. Mrs. Walton, can you tell the court in your own words what led to today's proceedings? Irene's eyes didn't drift to Danielle, not once. She looked straight ahead, like she was finally done trying to read someone else's reflection. My daughter-in-law, Irene said evenly, told her guests I was only kept around for the tax breaks. I heard it myself. I thought it was a cruel joke until I found out she'd filed taxes claiming me as a dependent without consent. A pause. She forged my signature on a power of attorney while I was recovering from surgery, then used that document to open joint financial accounts and submit forms to our bank. She and my son also claimed deductions for what they called elder care expenses, including rent for a garage that was never legally a dwelling. Her tone was almost conversational, calm, surgical. She told friends I was her dependent, but in her paperwork, she made me her asset. Danielle shifted in her seat, whispering to her attorney. The judge raised a hand. Ms. Walton, your counsel will have a chance to respond. Rosa approached the bench with her binder. Your Honor, We have notarized documents verifying that the signatures on the power of attorney and cohabitation agreement were forged. We also have the county's zoning records confirming the property wasn't approved for habitation, yet was listed as rental income. And we have IRS correspondence indicating falsified dependent status across multiple filings. The judge leafed through the binder. The sound of turning paper filled the silence. Danielle's lawyer stood, half stammering. Your Honor, my client was under the impression that Mrs. Walton wasn't lucid during her own recovery? Rosa interrupted, voice sharp but measured. That's convenient, because she was lucid enough to file an affidavit and report the forgery herself. A chuckle rippled from the back of the courtroom before the bailiff silenced it with a look. Danielle's jaw tightened. She's twisting it, she hissed to her attorney. It wasn't like that. Enough, the judge said. I've heard sufficient testimony. The words landed like stones in water. He took a moment, eyes on the file before him, then spoke slowly. The court finds substantial evidence of financial misconduct, document forgery, and attempted exploitation of a senior. The request for a protective order is granted. Ms. Walton, Danielle Walton, you are hereby fined for damages and barred from contact or representation in any financial capacity regarding Mrs. Irene Walton, effective immediately. Danielle's breath hitched. What? The gavel came down once. That's the order. For a split second, no one moved. Then Rosa turned to Irene, a small, fierce grin on her face. And that, she whispered, is how you file a break. Mark remained seated, staring down at his folded hands. He didn't look at his mother, didn't look at his wife, if she could still be called that. Danielle stood, her chair scraping back, face pale with fury. This isn't over, she muttered. You think you can humiliate me? The bailiff's shadow moved closer. She stopped, snapped her bag shut, and stormed out of the courtroom, heels striking the tile like gunfire. Rosa exhaled. Clint from the back row gave a small nod, the kind accountants save for perfectly balanced ledgers. Mark stood slowly. Mom. Irene didn't turn around. Go home, Mark. He did. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded. A reporter from the Lexington Herald held up a microphone, her voice chirpy and rehearsed. Mrs. Walton, can we have a statement? Irene's gaze swept past her, finding Paula waiting by the curb, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I think she just made one, Rosa said, ushering her away. Paula's arms were open before Irene reached her. You did it, she whispered. You walked right through the fire. I'm still walking, Irene said. Cameras flashed. Somewhere, Danielle's voice was being replayed on local news, stripped of its power by the weight of public record. Then Rosa's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, eyes widening slightly. Well, she said, turning to Irene, looks like the IRS just froze their joint accounts. Irene blinked. Already? Already. Paula let out a low whistle. That's faster than choir gossip. Rosa smiled faintly. Consequences move quicker when they have paper trails. The wind lifted the edges of Irene's hair. Behind her, the courthouse loomed, a building built for judgment, but today, it had offered something closer to balance. She took the coffee from Paula, warm and grounding in her hands. For the first time in months, her reflection in the courthouse glass looked like someone she recognized. Someone free. The U-Haul sat crooked in the driveway of the house on Haverly Drive, engine idling like it didn't want to be there either. Danielle stood near the back, barking orders into her phone while her sister leaned against the cab door, arms crossed, waiting like someone picking up dry cleaning rather than a woman exiled from her former life. Irene watched from her apartment window, not out of curiosity, but for confirmation. Danielle wasn't crying, she wasn't shouting, she was just packing. packing her curated life into cardboard boxes and plastic tubs labeled home office and spa stuff and misc, like she could organize her way out of consequences. By the time the truck pulled away, her heels were clicking no louder than regret. Mark stayed behind. No surprise there. Danielle had always been the one with plans. Mark was the one with a calendar full of apologies. Word got around that he'd taken leave from work. Stress leave, they called it. Not quite fired, not quite protected. He walked the neighborhood with his head down now, barely nodded at neighbors, never looked toward the apartment above the garage. Once, Irene passed him in the frozen aisle at Kroger. He stood in front of the orange juice, hand hovering midair like he couldn't remember what he came for. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Back at her apartment, the envelope from Clint was waiting. Inside, the final trust certificate. Filed, sealed, stamped. Her assets secured. Her name clean. There was a note in Clint's careful handwriting. You've reached the end of the paper trail. The rest is just peace. See. Irene placed the certificate in the fireproof lockbox under her bed, next to her birth certificate, and the first photograph of her holding Mark in the hospital. She shut the lid with a click. The sound felt like punctuation. That Sunday, Paula hosted dinner. No guests, no announcements. Just roast chicken seasoned the way Irene liked it, fresh cornbread wrapped in a cloth napkin, and the pie cooling on the windowsill like something out of a better decade. The kitchen was warm. Real warmth, not performative hospitality. Irene sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap, taking it all in like it might dissolve. This is the first Sunday you've come here with nothing left to prove, Paula said, scooping chicken onto her plate. Irene smiled. Feels strange. Feels earned, Paula corrected. That's different. The food was good, the wine was better, and by the time dessert was served, Irene was laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in months. The kind of laugh that starts low, catches you off guard, and makes the room warmer just by arriving. Paula raised an eyebrow. Well, look at that. Your laugh came back. I think it just needed clearance, Irene said. Like everything else in my life. After dinner, they sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the early May sky shift from lavender to deep blue. The honeysuckle was blooming again, heady and thick in the air, like time was finally agreeing to move forward. I never told you this, Paula said, but the week you first came to live over that garage, you cried in your sleep. Every night for 3 nights straight. Irene didn't answer. You stopped around the 4th night, Paula added. But the silence that came after? That wasn't peace. That was defeat. Irene turned her head slowly. And now? Now it's different. Paula smiled. Now your silence feels like armor. Later that evening, Irene opened her apartment window to let in the breeze. She placed a fresh yellow sheet on her corkboard, directly below the first one, the one that started it all. This one didn't have a quote, just a date. May 12th, Danielle leaves Lexington. She clicked her pen closed, tacked it in place, then sat down at her desk, took a blank sheet from the drawer and began to write. This time, for no one but herself. No affidavits, no forms. Just a fresh start. But just as she wrote the first line, a knock sounded at her door. 3 sharp taps. She stood slowly, heart calm, steps quiet. When she opened it, Rosa stood there. Hair wind-blown, face unreadable, a manila folder in one hand. We need to talk, she said, holding it out. There's something new. Irene took it without hesitation. Because when you've burned your way out of one trap, you don't fear the match. You ask who's holding it. The tulips had returned to Woodland Park, taller this year, bolder, like they'd come back with purpose. Irene walked the paved path that wound through the trees, her steps unhurried, her shoulders finally loose. A family passed by with a stroller, A golden retriever bounding ahead on a leash. Someone waved from a bench. She waved back. She didn't know them. It didn't matter. She felt known by the moment itself. A soft wind caught the hem of her light cardigan, and for once, she let it lift without reaching to pull it back down. Every Thursday morning, she volunteered at the reference desk in the Lexington Public Library, 2 blocks from her apartment, close enough to smell the coffee from the corner cafe. She filed archive requests, guided teenagers through microfiche like a slow art, and reshelved history books with an almost ceremonial precision. Sometimes Rosa would stop by with a takeout sandwich or a new article clipped from the Courier-Journal. "This place is lucky to have you," she said one afternoon, leaning against the edge of the desk. "I like it here," Irene replied. "No one pretends to know your life. They just ask for help and say thank you." Novel concept? And no one tries to claim you on their taxes. Rosa barked a laugh loud enough to draw a librarian's warning glance. She raised a mock surrender hand. "Okay, okay. No talking near the nonfiction." Sundays settled into a new rhythm. Irene and Paula met at the First Methodist Church at 10 sharp. Sat side by side like twin anchors in the third pew. Afterward, they walked to lunch at Gladys's kitchen, where the cornbread always came warm and the waitress always called them sugar. "You used to shrink when people asked how you were," Paula said one Sunday, stirring her sweet tea. "Now you lean forward like you might ask them back." "I stopped borrowing shame," Irene said. "Didn't realize how much interest it was charging." They laughed, ate peach cobbler, and never once mentioned Mark or Danielle. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer defined anything. A week later, Rosa dropped by with a tote bag and news. "The hotline's live," she said, setting a flyer on the table. "Kentucky Elder Fraud Protection Unit. Confidential. Free. Fierce." "Catchy," Irene said, scanning the bold print. "We've already had 3 calls. One from a woman whose son is holding her ATM card for emergencies. Another from a man who hasn't seen his retirement check in months." Irene looked up. "You think they'll press charges?" "If they have a paper trail," Rosa said. "And if they've got someone who reminds them their voice still matters." Irene folded the flyer and placed it beside her yellow legal pad. "Let me know if you ever need a quiet voice with a loud memory." "You'll be the first," Rosa said. A few days later, a pale blue envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a simple white card. "Irene. Working with you changed how I do my job. Some people file taxes. You filed truth." Clint tucked inside was a $25 gift card to Tea Leaf and Cody's and a paperclip shaped like a gavel. Irene smiled. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She kept walking the park path that morning until the bench under the dogwood tree came into view. The same one she'd passed during winter when her bones still held frost from the garage. Now the blossoms above her head burst white and pink, like the air had forgiven itself for how cold it had been. She sat. Let the sun hit her face. No court dates, no depositions, no envelopes with barcodes or certified warnings. No one owned her time anymore. She pulled out her yellow pad from her tote, flipped to the last page, and wrote the date. May 19th. Then, beneath it, "First day I didn't look over my shoulder." She closed the pad, crossed her legs. Watched a child in a superhero cape chase pigeons across the lawn like they owed him something. She didn't envy him, but she understood him. Somewhere, Danielle might still be explaining herself to an IRS agent. Somewhere, Mark might be filling out job applications while pretending not to know why doors closed faster now. But here in the sun, under blooming branches, Irene didn't carry any of that anymore. She was no one's deduction, no one's liability. She was her own ledger. And as the wind combed through her hair, she leaned back, eyes closed, face warmed, and let herself finally say the words, not out loud, but inward, where no one could touch them. They filed me as a benefit, but I filed a break they'll never recover from.